Good morning and welcome to the Greenbrier Church Online. About 6 weeks ago, I made the decision to get off Facebook. Trista and I had often talked about how being on social media had the ability to affect my mood, and I had tried to step away several times before, but like a bad car wreck, I kept going back. It wasn't good for my psychological health, it wasn't good for my spiritual health, and so I stepped away, but I decided that because we're posting our sermons on Facebook that I had to keep an account. So in an effort to put some distance on social media, I deleted everybody except my close family. You see, I really want to walk like Jesus walked, but it's difficult for me to do that when I'm constantly face to face with keyboard commandos who all they want to do is argue or scream or fight. Even good Christian men and women get caught up in the fights and the name calling. And while we might not consider the people on the other side of the screen our enemies, there are times when we lack the ability to show them mercy. We lack the desire to show them mercy. I hope you remember when we were studying the Ten Commandments that I taught you that God divided the commandments into two sections. The first four commandments deal with our relationship with Him, the last six deal with our relationship with each other. That was on purpose. Because as Nadia Bolz-Weber said, God didn't give the Jews the Ten Commandments to save them from the world. He gave the Ten Commandments to save the world from them. When Jesus is beginning this X-rated sermon, the Beatitudes follow that same pattern. The first four deal with our relationship with God. And after we get our relationship with God right, then we can turn our focus to how we relate and how we treat and how we love one another. The second section of the Beatitudes begin in Matthew chapter 5, verse 7, where Jesus says that we find true and lasting happiness when we show mercy to others. But this is the first beatitude that has a law of direct return, because whatever you give away, you'll receive. I need to be pretty careful here because I would be quick to tell you that I'm a merciful person. I stop and buy lemonade from kids on the side of the road. I give money to people who are in need. I hold the door open for complete strangers. I even get items off the top shelf at the grocery store for people that aren't as tall as I am. And I often overstate my goodness. You see, being merciful is not the same thing as being nice or being a decent person. Mercy carries this idea of getting inside someone else's skin to look at how they view life and to feel what they're experiencing. Showing mercy is basically moving in and acting on the behalf of someone else who's hurting. There's this running theme through God's story about the need for His people to show mercy, whether it's the Sabbath laws about showing mercy to poor debtors in Deuteronomy 15, or Jesus' rebuke of the Pharisees in Matthew 23 because they thought rules were more important than people, or the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah because powerful people were abusing and taking advantage of the weak. But if we're going to take all of the biblical teaching on mercy and boil it down to one simple command, we would see that God is calling His children to get actively involved in the lives of hurting people. I don't remember his name, but I heard a comedian one time discussing religion, and he said, "I'm a very religious person. I'm a Jehovah's bystander." I had to rewind that and hear it again. You see, here's a guy who's honest when he said, "I'm a Jehovah's bystander." Basically, he said, I believe in God on an intellectual level, but I'm content to just stand by and do nothing. People of mercy cannot be a Jehovah's bystander because when we see someone who is hurting, we're compelled to show mercy. I read a translation of this beatitude that said, God's children find happiness when they get involved. I like that. Because we all know people who are hurting. Maybe it's somebody who's going through a nasty divorce, or maybe it's somebody that has a family member who's in the hospital with COVID. You might know a young couple who are struggling trying to find their way now that they have two kids under the age of 5 living in their home, or an older couple that's struggling with loneliness now that their kids have grown up and moved out. Every day we're surrounded by people who are in the middle of a struggle who desperately need just a little mercy. There are people that we see every day who've been left for dead or left in a pit of despair, and God wants us to crawl into that pit and to help them find a way out. Solomon writes in Proverbs 3:27, "Do not withhold good from those who need it when it's in your power to act." In other words, faith is a verb, it's an action word, and mercy is faith in action. If you see somebody in distress, if you just kind of feel bad for them, well, you're a Jehovah's bystander. You might overstate your own goodness. You might claim that you have God's love and God's presence in your life, but the truth of how you live your life is revealed in your choices. I believe it was John Wesley who first taught that the children of God are called to do all the good you can, by all the means you can, in all the ways you can, to all the people you can, for as long as you can. Jesus is teaching us that mercy is a verb, it gets involved, but maybe that's too simplistic. I mean, it's easy to talk about mercy or to tell somebody to be merciful, but where do we start? So in our time together this morning, let's unpack this idea of mercy and talk about a few ways that we can practically share mercy with folks that are hurting. And I think a good place to start is to share mercy by welcoming the peculiar. Bob Goff had a brilliant observation when he wrote, "Love everyone, but start with the creepy people. Then it gets easier." Every time you leave your house, and sometimes every time you enter your house, you'll encounter people who are a bit bizarre. It might be helpful for you to know that one of the ways that we cry out for attention is by being loud, obnoxious, or weird. A great indicator of how merciful you are is found in how you treat people that are different from you, or how you model love among the peculiar people in the model city. We need to remember that our community and our world are filled with people that are living in pain. And just because we seem whole on the outside doesn't mean that we're not a train wreck emotionally or spiritually. If we're willing to stop focusing so much on external behavior and to look more closely, we'll be able to see the hurt in the lives of other people. Every one of us act out when we're dealing with loneliness and hurt and depression. And people that are merciful are willing to accept everyone created in the image of God, no matter how tarnished that image has become. Do you remember the story of Jesus and the woman caught in the act of adultery in John chapter 8? Here's a woman who had tarnished the image of God. She was caught in the very act of adultery. And now she's dragged into a public place, thrown in front of a crowd, draped in her humiliation and guilt. The crowd begins to question Jesus about her. They want to stone her. They want to drop her in a pit and throw large rocks at her until she dies. Jesus has every right to distance himself from her. He has every right to dismiss her and to treat her as unimportant, as garbage. But Jesus chose mercy. And after calling out the whole crowd for the sin in their own lives, Jesus looks at this peculiar woman and says, "Neither do I condemn you. Now go and sin no more." I know we like to act and believe like we're normal and everybody else is weird. But you and I have our own share of times in our lives when our sin causes us to be a bit peculiar. I mean, Paul writes that all of us have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Every one of us have had times in our lives when we've struggled with sin. We know what it's like to battle addictions and behavior patterns that we wish we didn't have. And yet mercy means that if somebody falls into sin, we forgivingly restore them. We save our critical comments for ourselves because we know that we might be the ones that need forgiveness before the day's out. Mercy is being willing to stoop down and to reach out to people who are oppressed, to share their burdens, and to complete Christ's law of loving our neighbor. When we encounter somebody struggling with sin, mercy means that we go and we show them mercy and acceptance. When we see them in their struggle, we remember a time that we struggled and we love them back to God. We don't leave people in their sin. We put our arm around them and we gently walk with them back to a relationship with God. That's the story of mercy. I think a second way that we show mercy is by being kind to people, especially our enemies. You see, this is one of those teachings of Jesus that's a lot easier said than actually lived out during the week. Because once again, this X-rated sermon of Jesus is calling us to be countercultural. I mean, when somebody hurts you, you want to hurt them back. We don't get mad, we get even. But showing mercy is an action, and it's never a reaction. You see, when we show mercy to our enemies, it stands out. People take notice. During our country's current racial strife, we're often blessed with little nuggets of mercies. Pictures of marchers in the middle of a Black Lives Matter protest surrounding a white police officer to protect them. Or pictures of young black teenagers helping an elderly woman who has a flat on her car on the side of the road. Or a video of a group of young white teenagers helping a disabled veteran clean up storm damage in their yard. We're drawn to those pictures and to those videos because they're like finding beautiful little diamonds in the daily muck of life. The whole point that Jesus is making in this X-rated sermon is that his disciples are supposed to live differently than the world. In Luke's version of the Sermon on the Mount, we read, "Love your enemies. If you love only those who love you, why should you get credit for that? Even sinners love people that love them. And if you only do good to those who do good to you, then why should you get credit? Even sinners do that much. Yet you must be merciful, even as your Father is merciful." I would be willing to bet that right now there's a person that drives you crazy. They say mean things about you behind your back. They gossip about you. They complain about everything that you do. And every time they open their mouth, they hurt your feelings. And really what you want to do is you want to just punch them in the throat. But being merciful means you act differently. Mercy is where you swallow your desire to get back to them or to do even worse to them. It's where you choose to act out of love instead of justice. And I would love to say that when your enemy sees your reaction, they would immediately apologize and they would change their behavior. But our history says that's not the truth. Actually, they'll probably just continue to be bitter and mean and nasty. And that's why we're called to act on what Jesus has already done in our lives, not to react to what some other broken sinner has done. You see, a tangible mark of spiritual maturity is when we do good to our enemies. We don't just forgive them, we do good to them. And that wonderful backwoods logic, my granddaddy used to tell me, the best way to destroy an enemy is to make him your friend. We do that by showing them mercy instead of reacting to what they've done to us. And finally, this morning, I believe that we can be merciful by learning how to forgive people. I think we all want to be like John and be known as the disciple that Jesus loved, or Andrew and be known as the disciple that brings people to Jesus, when the truth is most of us actually identify with Peter, and we're really good with putting our foot in our mouth. In Matthew 18, Jesus is talking about personal conflict and forgiveness. And in verses 15 through 18, we're told how to make things right when somebody sins against you. That we don't allow sin to go unchecked. We do our best to get the problem fixed. We go beyond what you might think is right in an effort to find peace. The culture of the kingdom is different than the culture of the world. And so when Peter hears Jesus talking about showing mercy through forgiveness, he's a little concerned. I mean, Peter understands what Jesus calls him to do. He just wants to know how many times he has to do it. I mean, what's the number? Exactly how much mercy am I expected to give? How many times am I expected to allow somebody to put me in a position where I feel hurt and in pain, and then I'm expected to turn around and show them mercy? That's the heart of the question in Matthew 18. So in typical Peter fashion, he approaches Jesus and says, "Lord, when somebody has sinned against me, how many times am I supposed to forgive them? Once? Twice? As many as 7 times?" And really what he wants to know is, when do we get to the eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth part that we really like? Because that's what we want to do. We want to get even. Jesus' answering is a bit troubling. Jesus looks at Peter and says, "You must forgive not 7 times, but 70 times 7. That's troubling for Peter and for me and for you, because Jesus isn't actually putting a quantity on the times we're called to show mercy. Jesus uses numbers that the disciples understood as infinite. Peter clearly understands that a merciful person never limits the times he forgives. You see, the heart of this beatitude is to show mercy by offering forgiveness. And that starts by admitting that each one of us have areas in our lives where we're tempted. Maybe you don't understand why somebody can struggle with gossip, and they don't understand why you take credit for things you never accomplished. Maybe you can't conceive how anybody could ever be addicted to alcohol and drugs, and they can't fathom your inability to deal with greed. Well, how do you treat the fallen? Merciful people don't point a finger, they lend a helping hand. In essence, we're being called to show mercy because God first showed us mercy. There's going to be people that mistreat you, folks who act like grade A certified jerks, and I'm sure you're not surprised that they're jerks in the world. But when people are being jerks, we have a hard time dealing with them. So we're being asked to take a moment and to remember all the times that we were jerks. I mean, I can't count all the times in my life that I've done things my own way, all the dumb stunts I've pulled, and all the ways I've sinned. Yet God still loves me. And if God can be merciful to me with all that I've done, then maybe I can find the motivation to be merciful to others. As we close this morning, we need to remember the promise of this beatitude is if you are merciful, you will get the mercy that you need in the future. I don't expect to be perfect until I die. I'm sure you don't either. The truth is, there's going to come a time, maybe in the next 30 minutes, that we're going to need mercy. And God has already poured out His mercy in our lives, and He's calling us to experience the joy of sharing His mercy with others. And so as we come to the point in our time together when we leave the sermon and we gather at the tables, we need to take some time reflecting on when did we need mercy in our lives? Can you think of a time when you desperately needed mercy from God and from others? Can you think of a time as you look at the bread and you look at the cup about how many times was I broken? Did I make selfish, sinful choices? And yet because of the cup and because of the bread, God offered me mercy, not what I deserved, but what I needed. And then as we have that conversation and we honestly talk about what it means to receive mercy, then let that lead us into a discussion about what do we need to do to show mercy to others. Jesus said, blessed, happy, joyful are those who show mercy, because they will receive the mercy of God. You know, there's a lot of things I need in life. I need air, I need food, I need shelter, I need love. But on that list of things that I need and the things that you need to have a happy, joyful life, we have to remember to include mercy, not just to receive it, but we need to consider the happiness and the joy that comes from people who are willing and able to share it. As we look at the cup and we look at the bread this morning, we're reminded of mercy and what a great, beautiful gift that is. And so this morning, as we have those conversations, as we participate in the communion, I want you to think about mercy, not only what it means to accept it, but what it means to share it. I hope you know that you're loved and that you're missed. And I look forward to being able to see you and to talk with you very soon. I pray that today you go in peace. Have a blessed Sunday.